Each year at this time, the Sunday before we start the 40-day countdown to Easter, not including Sundays, that countdown that begins this coming Wednesday on Ash Wednesday, we are always offered a chance to re-examine one of the gospel accounts of what we often call the Transfiguration. It is the story of Jesus' face and clothes being transformed into an unearthly brightness as he is on a mountaintop, carrying on a conversation with two long-dead biblical characters. So this year it is the Gospel of Luke's account of the Transfiguration that we have this week. Since the beginning of stories, which is really the same as the beginning of humanity, mountains have held a revered place in human hearts and human lives. Think about Isaac's near-death experience and rescue by God via the ram caught in the thicket at the sacrificing grounds on the mountaintop. Think of Moses and the tablets of law etched in stone received on the mountaintop in the wilderness. Think of Elijah's experience of God and the sound of silence after the fire and the earthquake and the whirlwind passed. Think of Isaiah's detailed vision and the psalmist's many words of prophecy and security and strength that are found in what is often described the mountain of the Lord, wherever and whichever that mountain may be. And the list goes on and on. Mountains provide us close proximity to heaven. That is, we are closer to the heavens when we are on a mountaintop than we are on level ground. They provide us vision of distant horizons that we could not see from ground level. They provide us exhilaration and solitude simply by the challenge of climbing and reaching their peak. And surely they provide security from our enemies because it is so difficult to make it up the mountain. If we can place ourselves on one, we can defend ourselves. So when Jesus asked Peter and James and John to follow him up the mountain, neither they nor we should be surprised that something monumental is going to take place. And it does. Put yourself in their place. These three that Jesus has asked to go and climb a mountain with him. We're going to need to imagine the best physical condition and the least amount of injuries and ailments that we've ever had, perhaps in a combination that has actually never occurred in our own lifetimes, if we're going to make it to the top of the mountain. We're going to need comfortable hiking boots and socks. We're going to need water for hydration. We're going to need rest and preparation. You don't just jump up and climb a mountain from the sofa one day. It doesn't happen that way. Jesus and his disciples were prepared. We're going to need confidence in our guide. To travel up a mountain to a place that you've never been does require confidence in your guide. And Luke says there's one more critical component for this journey. The critical component for every journey, if you will. It sounds so ordinary. It almost eludes us unless we read carefully. The other component for this journey is prayer. Without it, there is no story to tell here. And remember that, because we'll be visiting that on the way back down the mountain. Now, it takes most of the day to get up the mountain. Climbing is that way. And by the time we get there, our muscles ache and our breathing is labored, both from the exertion and from the altitude. And we're ready for a nap, just like after a church breakfast with bacon and country ham and all that stuff that makes you want to sleep. But Jesus wants to pray and wants us to pray. And we give it our best shot, at least the staying awake part, for His sake, or so we may think. But our eyelids droop. We get napper's whiplash as our heads fall back and forth when we fall asleep, and our mouths drop open until we realize it's not just the four of us anymore on the mountaintop. Jesus is talking to two other people, two other guests, or are we the guest? And these two, along with Jesus, seem to be reflecting some sort of bright light, so much so that it is blinding. We cannot look directly at them. That'll wake you up. The top of the mountaintop and that bright light beyond what you've ever seen, here with three people in the glow of the light. And wait, we know these other two by their accessories, so to speak. These are the two characters who not only went up a mountaintop in their lifetimes, but also who represent the founding pillars of our faith, the representation of the law and the representation of the prophets. But they are also two whose departure from this earth remains an enigma. Moses is one of them. The one who received from God and gave to the people the law on a mountaintop was also sent up Mount Nebo in his last days at the edge of the promised land and given an opportunity to see that vast horizon that was the land of milk and honey. And he was told by God that he would not make that journey, that Joshua would be the one who would lead the people. But Moses was given an opportunity to go up and to see the land of milk and honey once. And then he died. He was buried, according to the scripture, by God in a location that has never been disclosed. I'm pretty sure this is the only recording of a funeral that God did solo. We don't know where Moses was buried. Perhaps there was good reason for that. Perhaps many would have stayed behind at his grave and not entered the promised land. So Moses' leaving of this earth is simply recorded by a story from God. Most of us get a little bit more than that when we're gone. People know there's a place where we are, or our ashes are, or something like that, but not for Moses. And the other one, Elijah. Remember Elijah, the prophet who mightily delivered Israel from the hands of Ahab and Jezebel and the 450 prophets of Baal. He is unique among the prophets as one whose departure from the planet occurred not in death, at least not the way that we usually experience it and know about it. He was swept into heaven by a whirlwind in the presence of a chariot of fire. You know those stories. Elisha, his successor, had been given the mantle and stood there and watched it happen. So here are these two who represent the law and the prophets, who represent the leaving of earth in a way that we can hardly imagine, and they are in a conversation with Jesus atop the mountain in this glow that is unearthly. So what do you suppose was the topic of conversation that Peter and James and John overheard between Jesus and Moses and Elijah? The Greek word that Luke uses is exodus, departure. It was Jesus' departure that is the critical event in this divine conversation. Not his trial, not his passion, not his crucifixion, not even his resurrection, but his departure. Why? Surely it is not because Moses and Elijah can't wait for Jesus to get to the pearly gates, as our imaginations and jokes have created it. No. It is because they know, the three of them, that his ascension and the gaping hole left by the permanence of his physical earthly absence will create a faith crisis of epic proportion in this ragged little band of followers, and will do the same for us. How will they make it without him? They who can call him Messiah one day and deny him and betray him the next. They who can worship him one day a week, but find it so difficult to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, to use his inaugural speech from chapter 4. How is it that we can worship him one day a week and then find it so difficult to do those things the rest of the week? There is only one way that they made it. Only one way that we will make it. Three things, all interconnected into one, will open the door for us this season of preparation to receive the good news that will arrive at Easter. These three things: pray, listen, and follow. Pray, listen, and follow. Prayer. We said we'd come back to that. It's what got the disciples up the mountain to begin with and gets us up the mountain. It's what showed them and shows us who's really there on the mountain and keeps us from running away in fear when we figure out who it is. It is also what gets us down the mountain. It will not only get us to Jerusalem and the upper room and Gethsemane and Pilate's courtyard and the crucifixion and the 3-day vigil over death, but will also get us through the very real pain and suffering of our own lives. Physical therapy and occupational therapy and psychotherapy and chemotherapy and radiation and broken promises and broken relationships. Distances of all sorts between us and those we love. And failure, for yes, it will surely come if we try to do anything of value. The death of the ones we are sure we can't go on without. Prayer will get us through that also. And for those questions that we're too afraid to answer and get rather uncomfortable when we hear them asked, prayer will help us face those. For that loss of function that comes with age and disease, prayer will get us through that. Prayer will get us through economic and vocational derailment and disaster when they come to. And I'm sure I've left out some of the ways that you have seen and experienced suffering yourself. But rest assured that prayer and God will not leave them out. Peter wanted to stay on the mountaintop. Wanted to build a nice sanctuary, a family life center, a kitchen, and wait for everyone to climb the mountain to get to them. If you build it, they will come, he seems to say. And that's when God descends in a cloud and nips this stay on the mountaintop and avoid real life plan right in the bud. His words are simple. Similar to the ones said at baptism, but different. You remember in baptism, they were addressed to Jesus himself. In baptism, he said, "You are my son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased." And here, He speaks to Peter and James and John, and he speaks to us. This is my Son whom I have chosen. Listen to him. Listen. It's the hardest part of prayer. The part where we have to shut our mouths and open our hearts. The part where easy and old answers and easy and old ways are challenged by new possibilities for the future. I think it was God's presence, God's voice, and God's specific instruction in the cloud there on the mountaintop that made Peter and James and John decide that it was time to go down the mountain. I think there was a little bit of fear in them when they heard that voice. But they knew if there was to be any hope for them and for all of those who would come after them, including us, beyond the physical presence of Jesus in a single time and place, that we must go down the mountain. And not only must we go down the mountain, but we must also be willing to go all the way into the middle of suffering and passion, our own and especially that of others. Pray, listen, follow. These three together open the path to hope, promise, and resurrection. Pray, listen, follow. Shall we?